All right, so Kimi K3 just dropped and people are losing their minds over it. But Mistral Medium 3.5 is sitting right there as a real alternative. Kimi K3 scores 93.5% on GPQA Diamond. Mistral Medium 3.5 scores 74.8%. And that nearly 19-point gap is a number we actually need to talk about. Both models launched recently and people are picking sides right now, which means the decision actually costs you money. So I'm comparing Kimi K3 versus Mistral Medium 3.5 across 4 real tests, coding accuracy, API pricing, multilingual support, and latency, and everything here traces back to verified sources. No vendor spin. Honestly, the model with the better benchmarks might actually cost you more per task than you'd expect, and the cheaper one has a real enterprise angle the other one just doesn't have yet. So which one you should pay for is way less obvious than the scores make it look. So this one's for you if you're choosing an API for a product, an agent pipeline, or just your daily coding workflow. Because pick wrong and you're either overpaying for capability you don't need, or you're shipping a model that can handle your language requirements or your latency budget. And both of those are real costs, not hypothetical ones. Test 1, reasoning and coding accuracy. When this goes wrong, your agent writes code that looks plausible but fails silently, and you don't catch it until it's already in production. So a model that scores poorly here is actively generating work you have to redo, on top of being slower. What surprised me here is how wide the gap actually is. I pulled numbers from Artificial Analysis and Requesty, and Kimi K3 hits 93.5% on GPQA Diamond, while Mistral Medium 3.5 sits at 74.8%. And on the Intelligence Index, K3 scores 57 versus Mistral's 29.9. So that's basically double, though these come from different test harnesses, so treat it as directional, not a controlled head-to-head. Now, the gap looks massive, and I think it kind of is, but there's a real caveat here because these scores come from different aggregators running different setups. So you can't just stack them side by side and call it a fair race. And Mistral also has a 94.2% on the tau squared bench, where K3 has no published number at all, so the picture isn't totally one-sided. Kimi K3 takes test 1. I was expecting a close race given Mistral's reputation, and the intelligence index being nearly double was genuinely not what I thought I'd see. And even with the different harness caveat, the direction is clear on every metric where both models have data. So that puts us at Kimi K3 1, Mistral Medium 3.50. Test 2 API pricing. If you're running thousands of requests a day and you pick the wrong model, you can burn through your budget before you even notice. And one model here has a mandatory thinking mode that racks up output tokens on even short tasks, which makes the bill way harder to predict. I checked confirmed rates across multiple independent sources. And Mistral Medium 3.5 is $1.50 per million input tokens and $7.50 per million output, while Kimi K3 is $3 in and $15 out. So that's exactly a 2x gap on both sides. And K3's thinking mode bills reasoning tokens as output at $15 per million, so a short task gap is real. But K3's caching story changes things a bit, because OpenRouter reports a 92% cache hit rate on K3 traffic, which brings the blended input rate down to around 30 cents per million on repeated prefix workloads, though no equivalent blended rate exists for Mistral. So you can't do a clean apples to apples on effective cost without knowing your own cache hit ratio. Mistral Medium 3.5 takes test 2 on raw cost. I was expecting the caching story to close the gap more than it does, but half the cost on both input and output is a pretty clear result. And K3's mandatory thinking mode just adds another unpredictable layer on top, so that ties things up. Kimi K3 1, Mistral Medium 3.51. Test 3 multilingual and language support. If you ship to users in French, Arabic, or Japanese, and your model silently degrades in those languages, you find out when customers complain, not before. And for enterprise buyers in the EU, data residency isn't optional. A model with no documented answer to that question is one. You can't legally deploy in certain contexts. What I found here is pretty interesting. Mistral Medium 3.5 has an explicit list of 24 supported languages right on the Hugging Face model card, including Chinese, Japanese, Korean, Arabic, and the major European languages, while Kimi K3 has no published language list in any source I reviewed, and it's built by a Chinese lab, so Chinese support is very likely. But I can't confirm it from a source. Now, the lack of a published list doesn't mean K3 is bad at other languages, and strong Chinese language capability is a pretty safe assumption given the lab, but assumptions aren't documentation, and if you need to tell a compliance team or a customer which languages are officially supported, Mistral has that answer, and K3 just doesn't right now. Mistral Medium 3.5 takes test 3. I was expecting K3 to at least have some documented language coverage given its origin, and it might be great at Chinese in practice, but there's nothing sourced to point to. So 24 documented languages versus 0 published is a clear gap. And the scoreboard now reads Kimi K3 1, Mistral Medium 3.52, test 4, inference speed and latency. When a model burns 13,000 thinking tokens on a short task, Your user is sitting there waiting, your cost spikes, and your product feels broken even if the answer is correct. And rate limit errors at launch, like the 429's K3 was throwing on Open Router, mean your app goes down at peak load, which is the worst possible time. Honestly, there's no clean number for either model here. Artificial analysis rates K3 as slower than median, and one documented short task burned over 13,000 thinking tokens, while Mistral has no published speed figure at all. And what surprised me is how useful Mistral's effort equals none setting actually is, letting you skip reasoning entirely for fast replies without switching models. This one's genuinely hard to call because K3 added standard and high reasoning modes on July 18, 2026. So the max effort only problem at launch is partly fixed. But Mistral has no published throughput numbers either, and the absence of complaints isn't the same as confirmed uptime. So a fair numeric comparison just isn't possible here. This one's a tie. I was kind of expecting one model to pull ahead on speed, but the data just isn't there to call it. And while Mistral's configurable reasoning is a practical advantage and K3's launch error 429 errors were a real problem, neither side has the numbers to close it out. So the running score is Kimi K3 1, Mistral Medium 3.52, with 1 tied. So here's where Kimi K3 clearly wins. Coding and reasoning benchmarks, and it's not close. GPQA Diamond 93.5%. Intelligence Index nearly double Mistral's score. Coding Index at the 95th percentile. Context window at 1,048,576 tokens with no long context surcharge, which is 4 times larger than Mistral's 262,000. And for agentic workloads, K3 sits at the 97th percentile on the agentic index. And here's where Mistral Medium 3.5 clearly wins. Raw API cost is $1.50 per million input and $7.50 per million output. Exactly half of K3 on both sides. Latency control is real because you can set effort to none per request and skip the thinking token tax entirely. There are 24 officially documented languages, and EU data residency is available on Mistral platform, which K3 has no published answer for. Okay, so honestly, I was expecting the benchmark gap to make this an easy call, but the pricing and latency story flips it depending on what you're actually doing. So if you need a model grinding through hard coding problems or long document agent tasks, and you can absorb the cost, go Kimi K3. And if you need cheaper, faster, configurable reasoning with documented language support and a clear EU compliance story, go Mistral Medium 3.5.